Long before steel towers, electric cooling systems, and modern construction machines, ancient African engineers were solving problems that architects still study today. Imagine standing at the edge of the Sahara Desert as the golden hour sun melts across the horizon and rising from the sand, silent and eternal, are structures so precise, so powerful, so mathematically perfect that even today, with all our technology, we cannot fully explain how they were built. These were not accidents. They were not mysteries. They were the deliberate creations of brilliant minds who understood mathematics, astronomy, and engineering at a level that should have never been forgotten. This is not just history. This is a revelation that changes everything you thought you knew about human civilization and where it truly began. Now forget everything you think you know about ancient Africa, not the version handed to you in textbooks, but the full, unfiltered truth of what was built here. Look at the Nile River, stretching thousands of miles through Egypt and Sudan, cutting through desert and stone like a lifeline drawn by nature itself. This was not simply a river. This was the backbone of one of the greatest engineering zones in all of human history. Cities rose along its banks. Farms flourished on its floodplains. Temples reached toward the sky. Trade routes connected entire continents. Everything, absolutely everything, grew from understanding this single river. Ancient African engineers did not just live beside the Nile. They read it, mastered it, and built a civilization that the entire world would eventually look to for inspiration. Ancient African societies did not stumble into greatness. They engineered it deliberately, methodically, and brilliantly. These civilizations read the land, the stars, and the movement of water with extraordinary precision, developing knowledge systems that took centuries to perfect. The annual flooding of the Nile was not a disaster to survive. It was a calendar to follow, a fertilization system to harness, and a construction schedule to obey. Farmers knew exactly when to plant. Builders knew exactly when to work. Entire societies organized themselves around this natural rhythm. Blueprint-style geometry shaped their cities, with streets, temples, and waterways aligned to astronomical events and environmental patterns. This was not guesswork or luck. This was science, born from generations of careful, disciplined observation of the natural world surrounding them. Now let the camera take you over the Giza Plateau, because what you are looking at is not simply a burial site. It is one of the most sophisticated engineering achievements in all of human history. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2 and 80 tons, placed with an accuracy that modern laser technology struggles to match. The base is level to within just 2.1 centimeters across 230 meters. The four sides align to true north, south, east, and west with stunning precision. Glowing geometric lines trace the pyramid faces, revealing mathematical ratios connected to pi and phi. The celestial alignment with Orion's belt and the North Star was no accident. This was deliberate, calculated, and breathtaking in its ambition. Now shift your eyes from Egypt and look further south, deep into Sudan. where the red desert sands cradle one of history's most overlooked architectural wonders. Rising sharply against the horizon are the pyramids of Meroe, steep, elegant, and breathtaking. These were not copies of Egyptian design. The civilizations of Nubia, Kush, Kerma, and Meroe were independent powerhouses of architectural brilliance, developing their own distinct styles, their own royal traditions, and their own engineering mastery. Here is the fact that most classrooms never teach. Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt. More, yet the world barely whispers their names. These structures stand as proof that African engineering genius stretched far beyond the Nile Delta, running deep through the entire continent, waiting for the world to finally pay attention. But Nubian genius did not stop at pyramids. The city of Meroe was one of the ancient world's great iron smelting centers. Massive furnaces lined the landscape, producing iron tools, weapons, and trade goods that powered an entire economy. This was industrial engineering operating centuries before Europe mastered the same process. Nubian builders also developed sophisticated water collection systems, carving stone channels and cisterns deep into the earth to capture and preserve every drop of rainfall in one of the harshest environments on the planet. Their desert architecture used thick stone walls, shaded courtyards, and elevated foundations to combat extreme heat. When you look at modern desert buildings across the Middle East and North Africa today, you are looking at techniques Nubian engineers perfected thousands of years ago. Yet, this extraordinary legacy was deliberately erased from the story humanity chose to tell itself. Now imagine standing inside an ancient Egyptian home on a day when the desert sun is pushing temperatures past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. No electricity, no air conditioning, yet somehow it is cool inside. How? Ancient African builders had already engineered the solution. Thick mud brick walls absorbed intense heat during the day and slowly released it only after the sun went down. Interior courtyards were positioned to pull natural breezes inward, creating constant airflow without a single machine. High ceilings allowed rising hot air to escape upward. Narrow passageways funneled cooling winds directly through living spaces. These were not accidents. They were calculated design decisions. Today, architects call this passive cooling, and it is now considered cutting-edge, sustainable innovation. Ancient Africans were simply calling it home. Ancient canals, irrigation channels, shaduf water-lifting devices, and carved stone basins were not just tools. They were the lifelines of entire civilizations. Controlling water was the true foundation of African survival and success. Along the Nile, engineers developed sophisticated flood management systems that turned seasonal destruction into agricultural abundance. In desert regions, underground cisterns and carefully engineered reservoirs stored water across dry months, sustaining millions of people across centuries. Wells were not simply dug, they were architecturally planned with precision. What makes this truly remarkable is the philosophy behind it all. Ancient African engineers did not fight nature. They worked with it, designing systems that were both efficient and deeply sustainable. Without this extraordinary mastery of water, none of the great monuments, cities, or civilizations we have explored would have ever been possible. But the genius of ancient Africa was not only built in stone, it was written in numbers and stars. The temple of Abu Simbel was positioned so precisely that twice each year, sunlight travels deep into its inner chamber, illuminating the faces of gods carved 65 meters into solid rock. This was not coincidence. This was calculated. Ancient African builders used mathematical ratios embedded in pyramid construction that mirror what we now call the Pythagorean theorem, centuries before Pythagoras was even born. Star maps were carved into temple ceilings, tracking constellations with scientific accuracy. These builders were not simply craftsmen. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and environmental scientists operating at a level of intellectual sophistication the modern world is only beginning to fully appreciate and acknowledge. Look closely at the Lincoln Memorial. Now look at an ancient Egyptian temple. The columns, the symmetry, the overwhelming sense of permanence. These are not coincidences. The camera now moves between ancient Egyptian obelisks and the Washington Monument, between the lotus-capped columns of Karnak and the pillars of nearly every major government building on Earth. The design language of power that the modern world speaks fluently was written first in ancient Africa. The principles of sacred geometry, precise proportion, monumental scale, and symbolic alignment did not emerge from Greece or Rome. They traveled there. Western classical architecture borrowed these foundations directly from African genius, often without a single word of acknowledgement. What the world calls timeless design has an origin, and that origin is undeniably African. Ancient African temples were never simply places of worship. They were precision-engineered environments designed to control light, sound, temperature, and human emotion simultaneously. Walk through the temples of Karnak or Luxor, and you are walking through a calculated experience. Towering pylons filtered sunlight into dramatic shafts. Processional avenues stretched hundreds of meters, building psychological anticipation before any sacred space was entered. Inner sanctuaries were oriented with mathematical exactness so that sunlight struck specific altars only on specific days of the year. The Nubian temples of Naka and Musawwarat es-Sufra followed the same principles, engineering awe into every stone. Modern museums, cathedrals, luxury hotels, and government memorials use these exact spatial strategies today, manipulating scale, light, and sequence to produce reverence in visitors, drawing directly from an African blueprint thousands of years old. Today, something remarkable is happening in architecture and urban planning. Designers and city planners worldwide are returning to principles that ancient African civilizations mastered thousands of years ago. Courtyard housing, passive ventilation, natural material construction, and community-centered city layouts are no longer considered old ideas. They are now celebrated as revolutionary solutions to modern challenges like climate change, overcrowding, and energy consumption. Contemporary African cities are rising, with buildings that honor these ancient blueprints, blending heritage with innovation in ways that feel both timeless and urgent. Renowned architect Diébédo Francis Kéré once stated that African vernacular architecture holds answers to questions modern builders are only beginning to ask. The legacy of ancient African engineering is not preserved in museums alone. It is alive, breathing, and actively designing the future. For centuries, colonial-era illustrations and textbooks stripped African identity from these extraordinary achievements, crediting ancient Egyptian and Nubian genius to outside civilizations. The erasure was not accidental. It was systematic, deliberate, and deeply political. When you control the story of the past, you control the perception of the present. Visuals from old European engravings show pyramids and temples presented as mysterious and authorless, as if they appeared from nowhere. But today, something powerful is shifting. Historians, archaeologists, and African scholars worldwide are reclaiming this truth with evidence, excavation, and undeniable data. Modern discoveries are restoring African identity to these monuments where it always belonged. This is not about anger. This is about restoration. Knowing the truth changes everything, because a people who understand the depth of their ancestors' genius carry that power forward into everything they build next. And here we are, standing at the edge of something profound. The pyramids still rise. The Nile still flows. The Nubian temples still catch the golden light of the same sun that ancient engineers once studied with breathtaking precision. This was never just history. This is the story of human potential at its most extraordinary. Born from African soil, African minds, and African hands, every perfectly placed stone, every cooling courtyard, every water channel carved through desert rock tells us something we were never fully taught. Civilization did not begin in spite of Africa. It began because of Africa. The future of architecture may not be found only in technology. It may be hidden in the ancient African wisdom we forgot to study. Remember that truth. Watch as ancient ruins dissolve into modern skylines. Then return to stone and sand. An unbroken thread of human genius stretching across thousands of years. The same minds that aligned temples with stars and cooled homes without electricity gave the world its architectural language. That knowledge was never lost. It was simply waiting to be remembered. If ancient African civilization fundamentally changed how humans build, imagine what else history forgot to tell us. Imagine what other stories remain buried beneath the sand, waiting for someone curious enough to dig. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories of ancient genius, lost technology, and the civilizations that quietly shaped our entire world. The screen fades to black. A single Nubian pyramid stands silhouetted against a sky full of stars. The wonder is just beginning.